this incredibly awesome music to bring you some incredibly awesome political talk on Damn Radio.
Hello, good evening, welcome. I am Samuel Trapp. This is International Flavor. You are on Damn Radio, live from the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio with me. Last night, just a recap, we were discussing nuclear weapons and President Trump's statement that, we're just going to start some more nuclear weapons testing. Let's do that, which we pretty much quit in, 1992. I was on the Nevada nuclear test site during those years and was around for the last nuclear tests that were conducted there, escorting my Russian counterparts whilst they verified our nuclear testing. I gave a preliminary discussion of what that was last night, and we're going to get into, and last night we had decided that there's a lot of information to go through, and I'm going to go through it as long as it takes. Might finish tonight, might not, but I'm not going to rush through it because it is a topic that I enjoy talking about. It's a topic that I know a reasonable amount about, and I was directly involved in what went on out at the Nevada nuclear test site during the waning years of nuclear testing programs. Last night we covered some of the basics. We had some good conversation on the telephone, and that was pretty cool. If you'd like to call in, please do. 573-746-8020. You can send in emails if you like to live@damradio.com. I actually even read them sometimes, or SamuelT@internationalflavor.com. If you want to listen to last night's show, go out to internationalflavor.com and listen to it. Or JR does an excellent job of putting all the shows out at damradio.com/podcasts, and you can listen to everybody's prior shows, should you feel the urge. And I believe, let's see, we're going to continue on. We're going to start with treaties and where the treaties are, where we stand in the treaties. But before we get to that, there are a couple of things that are really pissed me off today. Things that I just can't stand, okay? So Whitaker, whatever his name is, U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine or whatever they call him these days, went over there and basically told Zelensky it's time to finalize this conflict. That didn't go too well. Zelensky's not listening at all. Surprise, surprise. That's not happening. But I watched. You'll never get this in news over here. And there's a lot of people that have begun to discover RT news, okay, in English. Very similar to what the U.S. put out. What do they call it? Radio Free Europe or Voice of America or whatever that we have put out. Now, you could argue that a lot of it is propaganda. You certainly need to look at every side of the equation. But here there's a couple of stories in there today that I'm going to share with you. Two of them have to do specifically with nuclear testing and President Trump's recent thoughts on it. And so whether you believe it or not, I don't care. But it's a different point of view, and you can hear the other side. I don't think there's anything to disagree with. It's just regular reporting. Frankly, I tend to believe what comes out of RT and Al Jazeera and other places more than I believe the crap that they spew over here. And it reminds me of when I was a younger man, and you could watch the news and it wasn't so full of twist and nonsense. And ours has gotten slightly better recently, truthfully. I mean, there's still vitriol everywhere, but this is a little bit different. But I wanted to share with you, and if you want to find this, look up rt.com/Russia /627-301 Ukrainian drones kill civilians / And, you probably won't get there, but the title of the article on RT is Ukrainian Forces Kill Civilians with Direct FPV Drone Hits. And there are some pretty damn graphic videos. And so I'm going to read the story to you because it's really not that long, but all the videos are there. This is disgusting, what they did to Ukrainian civilians who attempted to reach Russian military positions while carrying white flags were fatally struck in direct FPV drone, first-person view drone attacks by Ukrainian forces, according to Russian media reports. The disturbing videos obtained by RIA Novosti and TASS on Monday show unarmed men, 2 of them, walking along a dirt road outside the village of Petropavlovka near Kupiansk in Kharkov region. In the footage, an FPV drone hovers in front of the first man for several seconds as he walks forward, accompanied by his dog. The drone swoops down and strikes him directly in the torso as he attempts to duck. The man is killed instantly, and the dog is seen writhing in pain. The second man drops his belongings and slowly approaches the scene, making the sign of the cross over the first victim's body. Later in the footage, he is also struck by a drone. In the extended footage of the second strike, the second civilian is on his knees praying at the time of the Ukrainian drone attack, which killed him on the spot. This is disturbing. I'm telling you, I watched them both, and I don't like this stuff. Anyway, the disturbing videos highlight hardships civilians are facing while trying to flee the war zone. 4-time Ukrainian MP turned Russian blogger, a guy named Oleg Saryov, has said, poor villagers, and these guys are obviously old and they're obviously civilians, poor villagers and the elderly have only one option: cross the front lines, like in the video, or wait it out in the basement until it rolls over their heads. This carries the risk that the Ukrainian military will execute them for having pro-Russian sentiments, Saryov wrote on his own Telegram channel. In late October, Chief of the Russian General Staff Valery Gerasimov reported to President Putin that around 5,500 Ukrainian servicemen were surrounded in Krasnoarmeysk, which is known as Pokrovsk in Ukraine. Another 5,000 troops were blocked in Dmitrov, which is Mirnograd, and in Kupiansk. Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky previously described the situation as difficult, but now he denies any encirclement at all and accuses Moscow of exaggerating its battlefield gains. I follow these every day. The guy's full of crap, and he's lying, okay? You can watch this every day and see where they're going with the videos, all, geolocated, all of these videos. Last week, Putin, in the surrounded places, stated that Moscow would halt offensive operations to allow Ukrainian and foreign journalists to visit the front lines to see with their own eyes that the Ukrainian troops were trapped in these 3 towns. Kiev, however, barred media workers from making the trip. The defense ministry accused Kiev of deceiving both the Ukrainian public and the international community about military setbacks. Officials report that Ukrainian soldiers have attempted to approach Russian positions with white flags in recent days, but their own people are killing them. And that's been going on for 3 years. You know, you go surrender. If you go to surrender, you're going to be killed by your own people. And, they don't, you can't do that. So you're supposed to you either die in combat or you die trying to surrender. I don't know. This needs to be taken care of. We're going to get back to the nuclear story now, but that story bothered me enough to want to share it. Let's talk about before we get to the next parts of my what do you call it, reporting from last night, we're going to continue on the nuclear testing side and what it entails. Last night I told you about how it works in the underground nature, the vertical versus the horizontal shafts, and how that all works, and what we did and how long it took. So the U.S. Energy Secretary, there's a story about him from the 2nd of November, okay, just what was that, Sunday, I guess that would have been. And he said, let's see, nuclear weapons tests recently ordered by U.S. President Donald Trump will not involve actual nuclear weapons, said Energy Secretary Chris Wright. On Fox News Sunday briefing, Wright described the trials as part of a modernization program involving sophisticated systems the U.S. has been developing to replace aging components of its nuclear arsenal. I think the tests we're talking about right now are system tests. These are not nuclear explosions. These are what we call non-critical explosions, adding that various components will be tested to ensure that they deliver the appropriate geometry and set up the nuclear explosion. When he was asked if residents near the nuclear test site in the Nevada desert should expect to see a mushroom cloud anytime soon, he replied, no worries about that. Now, that's absolutely true. There haven't been mushroom clouds there since the 50s. There was one venting incident, which I think was in 72, but I don't remember the date. I talked about it last night. We're not going to cover that again. But above ground testing ended in the 50s, okay? Trump, well, maybe early 62, something like that, after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Trump instructed the Pentagon last week to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis with Russia and China. Russia and China aren't conducting nuclear tests, so that's a problem. Vice President J.D. Vance said it is important to ensure that the nuclear arsenal we have actually functions properly. Now that I might support, but there are ways to do that. We have all of the data from every test that ever happened, and if you reviewed it now, again, you could probably gain 10 times more off of the information with today's technology. Does that make sense? Let's see. The U.S. stopped conducting nuclear testing in 1992 under a Congress-mandated moratorium, and the rest of the world followed suit, except for the examples I gave last night. Washington Post said on Thursday that resuming nuclear tests would take years and hundreds of millions of dollars. Sounds like they were listening to me last night. The U.S. carried out its last nuclear detonation more than 3 decades ago at the Nevada test site, which now relies on computer simulations instead of live explosions. And we're going to follow that a little bit more. Let's see here. And today's news, Dmitry Peskov was quoted, and he was talking. Kremlin expects Trump to clarify what he means about his nuclear test claims. And here's what you get from the Russian side. The Kremlin has called for a clarification from the Washington following recent remarks by Donald Trump, who claimed that Russia and China are secretly conducting nuclear weapons tests. As I'm going to show you tonight, or tell you about tonight, that's impossible because we would know instantly if they did. So there are no secret nuclear weapons testings going on, or we would know, all right? And I'll explain that as we go through. Russian President Vladimir Putin, his spokesman Dmitry Peskov, told RT Tuesday that neither country has resumed such activities and that both remain committed to existing international agreements, which we're going to cover first, right? We probably still need to receive clarifications from the American side, Peskov said. Neither Russia nor China has resumed nuclear tests. Moreover, both Moscow and Beijing insist that all countries remain committed to their obligations under the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. I was part of the Threshold Test Ban Treaty, which limited it to 150 kiloton. Peskov made the remarks days after Trump claimed in a televised interview that the U.S. was... Trump just pulls crap out of his rear end. And here's an example, okay, that the U.S. was the only country that doesn't test nuclear weapons. And he suggested that both Moscow and Beijing had resumed such activities. He ordered the Pentagon last week to begin preparations to restart nuclear testing. What the head of the American state means, we simply cannot say right now, unfortunately, the Kremlin spokesman added. The U.S. last carried out full-scale nuclear test in 92, when the moratorium in place has been in place since then. Energy Secretary Chris Wright clarified Sunday that the tests ordered by Trump will not involve detonations, describing them as non-critical trials. Despite Trump's assertions, Russia's most recent nuclear-related tests, including the launch of the Burevestnik nuclear-powered cruise missile and the Poseidon underwater drones, did not involve nuclear explosions. Putin has previously indicated that Russia would only consider resuming testing if other nuclear powers abandon the moratorium. China's foreign ministry denied conducting nuclear tests also, and has urged the U.S. to uphold its own obligations under the global test ban framework. While Trump claimed the goal of renewed testing is to push for global denuclearization, he also boasted that the U.S. possesses enough nuclear weapons to blow up the world 150 times. Now, that's what we were attempting to get rid of in my youth. And now, well, what the hell? Let's get back into it, right? Anyway, nonsensical nonsense as usual in the world of politics, especially in Washington. Last night I covered for you how underground testing actually works. Tonight we're going to start with treaties, what they say and where we go. Hopefully, and we're going to take our time going through it. If somebody wants to call and ask questions, I'd be happy to go through as much as I can say on it. We're going to talk about our U.S. record and the Nevada story, what happened in Nevada. Then we're going to go on into Russia, which is the next largest group, Soviet Union, that conducted tests in Semipalatinsk and Novaya Zemlya, and we're going to go through all of that, and then we're going to go into other, also WICs, also RAND, France, UK, China, India and Pakistan, Israel, and the DPRK. We're going to go through and see where they did. Later, we're going to talk about what it would take to restart nuclear testing. Right, and then we're going to conclude with a little bit of facts and some of the things that come from it. If we get finished today, great. But I'm not gonna kill myself to make sure I get there. If we don't finish tonight, well, there you have it. We won't. So, how do you like them apples? Do you remember that from Good Will Hunting? Do you like apples? And the guy says, yeah. He goes, I got a number. How do you like them apples? Remember that? I digress, talking about apples. So we're going to start with treaties. And let's talk about what the treaties say and where we sit in those treaty eras. Now, if you remember last night, I talked a little bit in the beginning about how the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, or was it 63? Oh, I think it was 62. Cuban Missile Crisis, where, we had to turn back and create some kind of a deal to so the Cubans didn't get missiles in their area. And so in 1963, there had been plenty of above ground testing, plenty of in the ocean testing and things like that. But after the Cuban Missile Crisis and everybody had these nuclear fallout shelters in their backyard and whatnot, in 1963, they entered a limited or partial test ban treaty called the LTBT, what it bans and what it permitted, okay? After the Cuban Missile Crisis scared the daylights out of everybody, Washington, Moscow, and London cut the first big deal. They banned all tests in the atmosphere, outer space, and underwater. No more mushroom cloud postcards, no more strontium-90. Underground tests remain legal. If you pop a device underground, radioactive debris crosses the border, you have violated the treaty that there should be no venting beyond your own territory. That clause is the hinge that, swung the door closed on, 3 decades of U.S. underground testing, okay? At the Nevada site, this flipped our script. Atmospheric testing, which we had done plenty of, was over. And underground testing was now the default. The NNSS, which was then called NTS, Nuclear Test Site, stated, bluntly, 100 atmospheric tests were conducted through July of 1962. The limited limited test ban treaties was signed on August 5th of 1963, which started the age of underground testing. And so, it didn't end testing, put a little bit of a lid on it and said, keep your mess inside your own borders, okay? Later, in 1974, about 11 years later, the treaty that I was involved in, the Threshold Test Ban Treaty, TTBT, and the 1976 Peaceful Nuclear Explosions Treaty, PNET, put a 150 kiloton cap, okay, on how much you could blow up even underground, okay? The U.S. and the USSR narrowed the underground limits. No underground nuclear tests above 150 kilotons after March 31st of 1976. That is the basics of the TTBT. Negotiators carved out the, category of peaceful nuclear explosions, which are earth-moving. I told you a tiny bit about those last night. Canal-digging fantasies that both sides were attempting to figure out in the 60s and 70s. And they set 150 kilotons and 1.5 megatons total for group explosions, plus verification rules. These two treaties sat in limbo for years while they hammered out, how do we prove this? Okay. In 1988, this is when I got involved, right? There was a joint verification experiment. And both of these treaties, the PNET and the TTBT, entered into force in December of 1990. The 150 kiloton ceiling and the verification package have been legally in effect ever since. What did it mean in practice, right? U.S. and Soviet test designers had to, figure out how to live below the 150 kiloton with real-world uncertainties, and the verification game. They each got the ability to go to each other's sites and watch while the other conducted their tests. They had data exchanges, calibration shots, on-site access in specific circumstances, all the nitty-gritty that I was involved in that you keep, the threshold honest, right? The declassified records, what's really funny is I still can't get a copy of all the radiation I was exposed to at the Nevada nuclear test site. I really want it. And because, frankly, I got issues. But anyway, the declassified records showed the back and forth in painful detail. The discussions that we would have out there were just amazing. The little arguments that we would get into about whether you were able to see something. I don't know if anybody remembers it, but when I was out there, so typically there were usually 26 Russian scientists and hangers on, right, that flew over and stayed for 9 months a year, and they were allowed to verify what we were doing. And I had some funny stories. I may have told them before, but what I always tell this story because the guy was such a nut. And there was a little tiny guy, and so. In those days, the two interpreters, we usually had two interpreters on the American side, and then we'd have, there was only one on the Russian side. There was one guy that came and stayed the whole time, and his name was Valery Kuzmin. And he was also, according to the discussions that we had, he was a professor at Moscow State University, too. And at one point, he told me that he was a colonel, and you know, he didn't go much further than that, whether it was military, KGB, who knows? Doesn't matter. I don't care. And they didn't believe that I was a lowly staff sergeant. He would always, yeah, right. Like you're just some sergeant, you know, out here hanging out with everybody here. And we had a colonel or a general on our side who was going to be conducting all the discussions, along with all the scientists, Department of Energy people. There were several companies that were involved in it out there, and I can't remember names of them. They'll probably come up as we read through this because there were always tons of them out there. But they were all subject to the Department of Energy, and so they would do. I was involved in tests that were vertical and then tests that were horizontal. The horizontal ones went under mountains. And they would blow them up and they'd collapse. But the whole point was to, well, there were several points. One was we called it the hydrodynamic yield measurement method. So you could figure out from watching the waves of the shock and all the signals that came up those cables I told you about last night, you could measure the force of the bomb that you put in a certain amount of whatever the environment was. And if, you know, you put it in granite, here's what happens. You put it under the ground in limestone, here's what it is. You put it under lava, which is plenty of what's going on there in Nevada nuclear test site, and here's what you get, you know. And so all kinds of this stuff was going on, and they got to verify all of it. Well, and there were tons of scientists, and then there were a couple of people like the colonel or the supervisor of whoever it was. We knew who it was, whichever general was in charge from the Russian side or the American side. Of course, everybody knew who they were. Everybody knew who the interpreters were. Most people knew who the scientists were. We had a much smaller team, although the private contractor types worked with the Russian types fairly well, and sometimes we had to interpret for them as well. It was. I don't want to say that I didn't do much. I mean, I found that job to be relatively easy. It was just speak Russian all day, and that was that. And it was a lot of fun. And anyway, but there was one particular guy, a little guy named Mr. Dikov, and Dikov basically, I mean, if you translate it, means wild man, and the guy's name is Dikov or Wildman, however you want to say it. But Mr. Dikov was, I don't know, 5 foot tall, maybe 5'2". He was a tiny little guy. And it was funny as hell. He'd come out there and he always wore like a white shirt or something and short sleeves. It was generally pretty hot out there. And he would run around and ask questions, and all he did was bounce around to other places. And he came up to me and Valery Kuzmin, and we were sitting there talking, just shooting the shit. Well, pardon my French. While we were watching the scientists and engineers running around, and he came up to me and he goes, "Sam, And he's wearing this tiny little tie. He's wearing a clip-on tie that like a little kid would wear. It couldn't have been more than 6 inches long, and he's got this thing clipped on his neck. And I was like, oh, it's a very nice tie, Mr. Dekoff. And I was like, what the hell is this guy doing? And he's wearing this tiny little tie. And he goes, and it went down to about his the top of his chest, and that's it. This tiny little kid's tie was hanging on. I was like, "That's a great tie you got there." And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "We picked this up at the in Las Vegas the other day." He goes, "This tie is great." He said, "This tie is fantastic. Look, Sam, it hooks onto my shirt, with this little hook up on top." He said a clip-on tie. He didn't have to tie it or nothing. He just clipped it on. Anyway, that was a stupid part of the story, but we had a lot of fun messing with that guy. He was it was very odd, and I got more stories about him too, but that's not the point of tonight's show on this nuclear testing stuff. The verification part, here's where it comes in. And the scientists were verifying the real stuff that were going on. But guys from the KGB, like this guy, and he was a KGB goon or a party apparatchik, and he got to come over and he was a very nice guy. I don't have anything, negative about him. I thought he was hilarious. And he would come up and he'd, see a building in the distance or a huge crane somewhere, and he'd say, "Sam, how tall is that tower?" And I'd say, "I don't know. Looks like it's about 600 feet. And he'd go, "Is it?" I was like, "I don't know. Do you want me to find out?" And he'd say, "Can you?" I was like, "Sure." So I'd walk over to somebody and go, "How tall is that tower?" And the guy go, "I don't know." It looks like 600 feet or 500 or whatever. I was like, "I don't know." I said, "The guy wants to know how tall the tower is. Is he allowed to know?" He goes, "I don't care." He goes, "I'll see if I can find out for him." And then he'd come back and tell him how tall the tower was. Or you'd see some huge crane off on the street. "Can you tell me the specifications of the crane?" And we weren't hiding a damn thing, The scientists might have been, but if you're out there, clearly you can see what's going on. Anyway, it was pretty hilarious, but the verification of the treaty was the important part. And the whole time, we were trying to build relationships with these guys. At least I was. And we would have discussions at the on-site inspection agency. We would talk about these things. What happened? You'd always get debriefed. You'd always be talking to people. And they'd say, "What's going on here?" And frankly, around this time, remember, the Soviet Union's collapsed by now, and there's the walls come down, and we're trying to allegedly start to help these guys and make them our friends. And so they were excited, we were excited. There was plenty of reason to be positive about all of this. All this nonsense that's been going on since World War II is finally ending. But nope, didn't go that way, did it? Here we are, fast forward 30 years later, and we're in the same old crap that we were back then. In fact, probably worse. But it all started with these TTBT and PNET treaties that we got to work on. And it took the Wild West of underground testing and put, a regulator on it, a governor on the engine, 150 kilotons, period. So in 1996 is when this came up. Now, I had left active duty in 1995. And I think in 96, I was in law school by that time. And in 1995, they signed something that is all the parties. This is the big one. In 1996 came about the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, CTBT. The all means all ban that really isn't enforced because not everybody's ratified. But they ban all nuclear explosions anywhere, underground, underwater, in the air, in space, military or peaceful. It builds a verification machine. It's called the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, CTBTO. Got to have your acronyms, right? It has a preparatory commission in Vienna and a global international monitoring system, IMS, whose data are processed at the International Data Center, IDC. So it's legally, it's clean, technically it's serious. But the catch is the treaty only enters into force when all 44 named states sign and ratify. And we're not there. We're not even close. Okay? In the status of 2025, here it is. United States and China have both signed CTBT, but neither has ratified it. India, Pakistan, and North Korea never even signed it. Okay? Israel, Egypt, Iran, and Russia signed it, but they haven't ratified it. And, Russia had ratified, but Russia revoked its ratification in November 2023, saying it would mirror U.S. moratorium posture. So these are the ones that matter. If you want the Congressional Research Service version, as of 2025, 187 countries have signed, 178 have ratified, but of the required 44 Annex II states, only 37 have ratified. The hang-ups are the same usual suspect, and the Senate, our Senate, famously rejected Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty in 1999, 48-51-1. And that rejection, still shapes the politics of where we are today. So people say the treaty is dead, but it's undead. It's a zombie treaty, right? It's not legally alive, but it's not really buried. Meanwhile, all the sensors are on. People can tell where if you do a nuclear explosion. That's how we knew that North Korea had done it. That's how they know that what they've done with Iran. So this IMS, the International Monitoring System, right? It's like a microphone around the planet. Okay, there are 337 facilities. Vladimir Putin talked about this the other day. I told you that I was watching the Solovyov show because there were two things that happened. One, he spoke to a nuclear scientist, a Russian guy, for about a half an hour. And I hadn't had the chance to finish watching that last night, but I watched it last night laying in bed. And with this Russian guy that was talking about all the testing. And he was talking about some of these 337 facilities. And Solovyov was having a discussion with, I forget the guy's name, I wrote it down, but Yevgeny something or other. And he gave an interesting take on it. And they were talking about this 337 facilities. And I paid attention because I had already done the research on this and was talking to it. And here's how it goes. The International Monitoring System is like a success story from the Western side. And it really is a success story for the whole world with a catch, okay? When it's complete, there are 337 facilities, 321 stations, plus 16 radionuclide labs. They're spread around 89 countries. They use seismic, infrasound, hydroacoustic, and radionuclide tech to catch anything that goes boom. Any explosion, they know about it. The network is approximately 90% complete, and it has detected every declared DPRK test. And the data, here's the catch that people don't like, right? The data streamed to the IDC. In where? Where is the IDC? The International Data Center. Where does it go? Vienna, Virginia, in near real time. That is why even without entry into force, cheating is hard. But the 337 facilities feed Vienna. Nobody else. The guy's name, I was right, it's Yevgeny Buzinski. But it's accurate on the count and the Vienna hub, and it's consistent with Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Office's own numbers. he said that Russia has dozens, I think he gave the number at 42 IMS facilities in Russia, and the feed goes straight to Vienna, so they know if somebody is cheating. And so we would know, Vienna would know, Trump would know if somebody was conducting a nuclear test, underground or otherwise, anywhere in the world. We would know immediately, okay? And all of that is correct. So you can bury the bomb. You can't bury a seismograph. I mean, you can, but you can't bury the fact that the tech of the seismograph transmits everything to Vienna, right? So I don't know. That's the infrasound arrays, the hydrophones, all of that, and the radionuclide samplers all feed Vienna. And so the tech is all coming to the U.S., and they don't necessarily share it with everybody else, okay? So where does the U.S., well, let's not talk just about the U.S. Let's talk about everything. What's the state of the law today, right? The Limited Test Ban Treaty 1963 is in force. No atmospheric space or underwater. So that one is still legal and literal. It's there. The Threshold Test Ban Treaty and the peaceful nuclear explosion tests from 74 and 76 are also in force since 1990, capped at 150 kilotons. TTBT is the one that I participated in, okay? But Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty bans all nuclear explosions. Underground, above ground, anywhere. But it really isn't in force because a lot of the states haven't ratified it. And India, Pakistan, and DPRK's case, they haven't even signed. But the moratorium norm, everybody is following for the most part. Let's see. North Korea is the last to do it, and I believe it was 2008. And allegedly, Iran had suspected of doing it a couple of years ago, and but I'm not so positive of that. But the norm is there's a moratorium on all of it. And if Iran really had done one, they were talking about it, but they would know if a nuclear explosion had been conducted. We, the U.S., we have been on a unilateral testing moratorium of our own with Russia, actually. Russia followed suit, and so did China in 1992. And we keep track of our stockpile. But the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty was signed but never ratified and rejected in 1999. Both parties keep reaffirming the moratorium, but they keep the Nevada test site on caretaker status, hoping to, someday get to funnel all that money back out there to all their private colleagues, right? Russia, of course, revoked CTBT, that it was ratification, which they had done some time ago. They revoked it in 2023, but it will still mirror it first. And even recently, Moscow, Peskov, Putin have all said that we won't do anything unless Washington moves first. Okay? Could anybody sneak a test? The short answer is no. It's designed to catch it. The CTBTO's chief publicly warns that any renewed explosive tests would harm global security. So, that's his response to a presidential directive in Washington to prepare for resuming testing. So whatever anybody thinks about the politics, the international monitoring, and diplomatic blowback really aren't theoretical. CTBT is not in force, but the tripwire is. If you light the match and, half the planet's sensors file a report, but for your press secretary can say no comment, everybody knows that you've broken it, right? So, what are the common confusions? Israel's outside of everything. A lot of people like to say Israel never participates, and they've been very quiet about it. Nobody talks much about it. But Israel did sign the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, but they haven't ratified it. India, Pakistan, North Korea didn't even sign them. if the CTBT isn't in force, nothing stops anyone from conducting nuclear testing. That's not right. Limited test ban and threshold test ban and the peaceful nuclear explosions are all in force. CTBT creates a political norm to detect and disclose, and everybody is doing still the right thing, but the zombies, the undead treaty, are still hanging around there. Could you test small and hide it? Well, I don't think so, because the smaller you go, the less weapons useful data you get from an explosion anyway. The larger you go, the easier it is to detect. That's why the U.S. have thrown resources at non-explosive stockpiles instead of begging geology, to let them test some huge ones again. So, I don't know. Good stuff. Where does that leave us? It leaves us heading into the next segment, which is America's history. And what is the record and the Nevada story, right? Let's set the scene first. And I told you a little bit about it because I was there. And you're 65 miles northwest of Las Vegas. It's 1,360 square miles. It's the Nevada Nuclear Test Site. Today it's called the Nevada National Security Site. Area 51's out there. It's America's nuclear workshop from 1951 until 1992. 928 nuclear explosive tests in total were created, with 100 in the atmosphere and 828 underground. The government still posts these, with pride that we have done this. I thought it was nuts. The last U.S. nuclear explosion was on September 23rd of 1992. After that, there was a self-imposed moratorium. The desert didn't, have another nuclear explosion since. So that was the end. But let's rewind to the 1950s, when America was learning by doing, sometimes learning the hard way. Above ground in those early years, you saw the mushroom clouds climbing over Frenchman Flat and Yucca Flat. We had to watch the movies to the history. We had like 2 days of history stuff when we got in there. The idea, you saw soldiers, real people in real trenches, brought in for exercises to Desert Rock. The idea was to train for the nuclear battlefield, to observe and to maneuver through the dust that it created. At Upshot Knothole in 1953, more than 21,000 soldiers took part in Desert Rock 5, including for the famous atomic cannon shot Grable. That is not an urban legend. It's a historic record. You still can find the videos of this, the old reels, on old YouTube channels. And we had to watch those. And I couldn't believe it. These people are out there with sunglasses on in foxholes and trenches. 21,000 soldiers underneath a nuclear explosion so they could train, and they all got irradiated. And no doubt 98% of them are dead by now, if not all of them. But there was plenty of issues from that. I watched those images. They're old black and white films, troops crouched in foxholes, then standing up under the cloud. These are not propaganda. They're primary source history. The own documentation on Desert Rock, there are head counts, units, distance from ground zero, a dry inventory of how to march men through a nuclear detonation. There's nothing romantic about it. It's, radioactive logistics. It's nonsense. But by the time the 1963's limited test ban treaty came about, atmospheric shots were over. Okay, they could go underground, so the program went underground, arguably safer. Okay, I didn't know that. I'm not so positive it was so safe when I was out there either. We had to wear a dosimeter every day. You had this thing clipped on your uniform or your clothes. We didn't wear uniforms out there. We wore I don't know, dockers and pullovers, but you had to wear your dosimeter everywhere you went. And every month they would take your dosimeter badge and they would replace the dosimeter. So you had your badge on it, which showed where you could go on the facility. You had a TS for top secret, and you had S for secret. And there was a Q badge for the guys who were really up there, and then or could go to every single site. And mine was a TS, and I got to go to all the cool places, but not every single one of them, right? But it would always have this little chip on there that was a dosimeter, and they would take those things, and I'd say, "No, when do I get the readings? You can't have them." What? You're not allowed. You don't get your dosimeter. That doesn't happen. Your dosimeter, you're not allowed to look at it. The only people that can look at the dosimeter are I don't know what other people. So I don't know how irradiated I was. And they said, well, allegedly you're allowed to file a Freedom of Information Act and get your dosimeters. Maybe I should do that as part of the show. We'll figure out how I can get from the Department of Energy or from the Pentagon or whoever's got it, get my radiation studies. Wouldn't that be entertaining? Maybe I'll try to figure that out. I'll see if I can I'll do some research on it and hopefully report that to you tomorrow night where we go from here. But by 1963, atmospheric shots were over. Program went underground. There were line of sight experiments that I told you a little bit about, the HLOs, the firing of device down a pipe, which would blast hardware without cratering the surface. And once in a while, you would do a vertical line of sight test. And they did one called the Huron King in 1980, which was an under 20 kiloton device at the bottom of a shaft and a partially evacuated chamber at the surface, which contained live communication satellite, and a vertical pipe that carried the radiation up to it. Mechanical closure snapped shut to stop the radiation before it shredded the payload, the communication satellite. But then the chamber got winched away as the ground subsided, and that actually occurred. If you look out at Yucca Flat, and there are pictures of it online, you can pull it up. You can imagine a pockmarked plain of shallow bowls. Each one of them is a subsidence crater, which is the overhead soil settling into a cavity left by the explosion. So those bowls are permanent footnotes of underground testing. If you look at the aerial photos, it's the lunar album of U.S. nuclear history. So the naming protocols, they would name them, right? My own memory from this is because they used to pass out stickers for them all. And a lot of them were named for Texas counties. And that one... there was a test called Bear, and it was around San Antonio. That one went up on April 4 of 1991. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to remember the dates of that, if I was there for that one. Man, it would have been close. I came to the... but I can't remember what the name of I was there on so many of them because at any given time they were drilling holes for 2 or 3 different tests, and so you were bouncing around between different holes and different vertical or horizontal shafts of where they were able to look at. And the Russians could go, we want to go to this site today, or we want to go to that site. You go to different ones, but you remember how these I told you about the cables and the huge money that they spent on that. There were so many of these that had gone on. I mean, crossing these places in the desert, it was, kind of surreal to watch what was going on. When we had to drive 45, 50 miles, I mean, it was a huge facility. Like I said, 1,300 and something square miles and 65 miles from Vegas. But you'd have to go another 60 into the interior where they would blow these things up, right? And I don't know. Nevada didn't always get everything right. I told you a little bit last night about Baneberry in 1970 and the venting. A gas plug failed. The fissure opened up, and radioactive plume put a column about 10,000 feet in the air. So they didn't always, not every one of them collapsed as they were supposed to collapse and do. So they did some peaceful use testing. They were anything but peaceful to the people that were living downwind of there. There was one called the Sedan test in 1962, which was part of Operation Plowshare. It was a nuclear earth-moving experiment that cut a crater in the ground 1,280 feet across and 320 feet deep. Still, the biggest man-made hole you can tour in the U.S., but the Sedan also produced heavy fallout across the country. All across the country. So a classic example of how engineering with nuclear bombs collides with the public health. The crater is huge. The plume map is distressing. Okay, so let's put this in a simple timeline. Our government, put it in a simple thought process first. Our government has been destroying us for the longest of times. And from 1951 to 1962, they did it with nuclear testing 100 times above ground. Okay. So the signature images are towers, airdrops, balloon shots, mushroom clouds you could see from Vegas. From 1963 on, they went underground, shafts thousands of feet deep, devices sealed in canisters, diagnostic snaking back to trailer complexes. Through the 70s and 80s, there were names of these things: Mandrel, Grommet, Tinderbox, Schoolin, Julin, till Divider ended the chapter in 1992. So what has the U.S. done since we hung up this big faux hammer? The subcritical experiments in U-1A complex is now rebranded Pulse. These are deep underground experiments with plutonium and high explosives that never go critical, right? No self-sustaining chain reactions, no nuclear explosions. It's basically a stockpile. By measure, they verify it by measuring and math, high-speed diagnostics, X-ray imaging, simulations that keep nuclear warheads safe and reliable and do not break the test moratorium. So the government does talk about these openly. They do run a press release when one is fired. The first Nimble series shot under Pulse was in May of 2024. So since 1992, it's been only physics, not mental clouds. Mushroom clouds, I mean. The sites go from Mercury up through Frenchman Flat. It's a very large place. There are special effects, there are craters everywhere, and there are accidents and rumors. Bottom line is America built an underground testing machine. And tell you what, they used it. And, that is what they did. And a personal aside from me, because I was there, and we were laying cable, like I told you about, to the NASA control room, and I thought it was really cool and interesting, but I also thought, what a freaking waste of money. How many of these tests did you need? I mean, seriously, we conducted almost 1,000 tests. 1,000 nuclear explosions, underground and above ground. Only 10% of them above ground. But what did we get out of it? Seriously. And if everything is aging and it doesn't do any good anymore, and Trump says we got to start it back up, now what? The world has gone to these, less lethal means. Why in the world would we want to go start all that crap again? I don't know. We haven't lit a real device since 92. We have kept the engineering talent, I suppose, is alive underground. Stockpile is still there. The site is ready, I suppose, if the president does order a return to testing. That's unclear yet. But you couldn't just jump right back in, right? Well, let's move on to what Russia has been doing or did over the same period, because they did a good number of these too. So let's talk about Semipalatinsk and Novaya Zemlya. The Russian story for their testing. Semipalatinsk is in today's Kazakhstan, also called the polygon, and Novaya Zemlya, the Arctic archipelago where Soviets lit the sky with Tsar Bomba. Do you remember Tsar Bomba? The largest nuclear explosion ever. And then later they dug into permafrost to keep the bangs underground. And between these two facilities, you get a backbone of the Soviet and the Russian testing record. So Tsar Bomba, you can go out and watch that footage on YouTube. Tsar Bomba, Tsar being, Tsar, and the Bomba, of course, bomb. The Tsar bomb is huge, and you should check it out. In Semipalatinsk, this is, picture the expanse of a small U.S. state, 18,000 to 19,000 square kilometers, carved into zones for different kind of experiments. They had an experimental field for atmospheric shots. They did it too. They had boreholes. They had an atomic lake, and they had something called Degelen Mountain for tunnel tests. From 1949 to the 1980s, the Soviets did about 456 tests. 116 to 118, nobody knows the actual amount, above ground, so more than us, and 340 or so underground. That's the official tally cited by international health and monitoring bodies that have been studying the area for decades. I wonder, and the funny part is you can't find anything about this international health and monitoring bodies that have been monitoring what's gone on near Nevada. How come we don't have the same thing? And these are all Western. They get to go over there, oh, geez, we're really worried about these international health and monitoring bodies. Look what those Russians were doing. Well, we were doing the same thing. Nonsense. I never understand that. It's always, well, look what they were doing. Well, what were you doing at the same time? Anyway, Semipalatinsk is where the USSR went from. The first Lightning was the name of the device in 1949, and they began to mature into an industrial testing machine. They were pretty regular about it, just like us. And after the 1963 Limited Test Ban Treaty pushed everybody out of atmospherics, they shifted to underground as well. They did the same thing, vertical and tunnels. They moved underground and cut visible fallout, but didn't erase the legacy. Everybody has a long paper trail of health studies in neighboring communities. And the site was formally shut down on August 29 of 1991, a date later adopted by the UN as the International Day Against Nuclear Testing. So, the atomic lake that shouldn't exist. In January 1965, the Soviet Chagai test at Balapan excavated a crater and left behind a turquoise bowl that is called the Atomic Lake. It's more than a photo op. It kicked off a diplomatic headache. U.S. and Japanese sensors picked up radioactive debris outside of the USSR, which was a problem under the Limited Test Ban Treaty, because it banned that release debris beyond your own borders was a problem. Moscow's line was, it was deep, releases were insignificant. Washington cried foul. Either way, the physics lessons stood. Even contained underground shots can, burp up fission products into the open if the burial isn't deep enough or the geology is water saturated. Okay. Let's go on to Novaya Zemlya, where the Russians, where the ceiling was the sky until it wasn't, right? There were 3 test zones there with 3 separate purposes. Zone C is Sukhoi Nos, the big air arena. Massive atmospheric tests, including the Tsar Bomba in 1961. Approximately 50 megatons, the largest shot above ground. Then they had Zone A, Chornaya Guba, Black Bay, early underwater and above water surface shots, and later a handful of vertical underground tests. And then they had Zone B, Matochkin Shar, the tunnel complex. These are tunnels cut into metamorphic rock under persistent permafrost, where most underground testing happened from 64 to 90. Most of these were tunnels, horizontal. So depending on which technical catalog you read, Novaya Zemlya hosted about 130 to 132 tests total. The vast majority of Soviet total yield, with 42 underground after the Limited Test Ban Treaty moved, parties underground. The last Soviet test was October 24 of 1990. This is where Soviet engineers learned to run very large yield underground shots in frozen rock. Yields were estimated up to multi-megaton class underground. And wow, if Semipalatinsk was a factory, Novaya Zemlya was the cathedral where they proved that the containment would hold, and because they had some big tests up there. The permafrost fractured a couple of times at Matochkin Shar. Soviet data released after the Cold War indicated that a lot of noble gas seepage from underground was around, and there were 2/3 of the event showed some release and several significant venting incidents that forced them to change their practice. The U.S. had their mistakes as well, but the Soviets, especially in the north, had more. So after 1990, the shutdown and what's going on presently. Semipalatinsk closed in 91. Independent Kazakhstan studies since then document health and environmental problems. Novaya Zemlya was quiet after 1990, at least for nuclear explosions. What's changed lately is politics. In 2023, Russia revoked its ratification of comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty, saying it wanted parity with the U.S., which signed but didn't ratify. Diplomats still say they mirror the moratorium, but they say that the Arctic site is ready if the U.S. starts over again with testing. So in 2024, the head of that site said publicly that he could resume testing at any moment. So theirs is closer. So the lights aren't on, but the switch does work, and everybody knows where it is, basically. So let's talk about the Burevestnik for just a minute. I gave a story on that, a little bit of a tale last week on the Burevestnik in the test and what they've done. So the separate categories, Burevestnik is the nuclear-powered cruise missile. Says a lot about Russia's willingness to play at the edge of nuclear technology, but it's not a nuclear explosive test like the ones conducted in Semipalatinsk or Novaya Zemlya. It's a reactor-powered propulsion system. It is not a nuclear explosion, okay? So all it is propulsion, just like you got in a nuclear sub. We do them too. And it's just, we haven't done anything this small, and now I believe the old Trumpster's sitting there going, wait a minute, we don't have anything like that, because we don't. We don't have anything that'll fly 14,000 kilometers and loiter and sit, and you could have it sit there for a very long time on a nuclear engine. And so when are we making nuclear engines? Nobody knows, but maybe they're testing them as well. And maybe, since I'm not involved in it anymore, maybe we do have something similar. I don't think so, though, or we'd be all too proud to talk about it. And so far, we're not. So, I don't know. Talking about readiness, the implication is the Russians say they can, test a nuclear bomb with this at any time, underground, and see what happens. I don't know. That's what Russia has done, but everything is still closed, right? Everything is closed. Semipalatinsk taught them how to test, but it's closed. Novaya Zemlya taught them how to contain. It's still closed. And now Moscow is saying that, we still can do this if you guys start up again, right? Wanted to let's see what else we got here. We were moving on to France, UK, China, India, Pakistan, and Israel, and North Korea, and what they did. Because the French were a little bit... I remember studying all this stuff years and years ago, and there was some nostalgia in going through it for me, because it was... wow. I had forgotten how much there was to forget. Let's put it that way. So France, they did some explosions in the Sahara, all the way to the South Pacific. France used to, have colonies all over the place. They didn't do it in France. They did it in Algeria, right? They ran 210 tests total. So the French did 17 in Algeria from 60 to 66, 193 in French Polynesia from 66 to 96. The official French breakout, 4 atmospheric, 13 underground, and in one of the places, Ecker, 46 atmospheric and 147 underground at Mururoa and in Polynesia, right? Polynesia area. So in the Sahara, the early shots went into the air. The rest were drilled into granite in Ecker. Containment failed, sometimes is what they say. The Beryl Tunnel test in May 1962 vented hot rock in a radioactive cloud. Ministers on site were caught in the plume. They got killed on it. If the mountain, you can't outrun it. If it erupts, you're not going to outrun it. And in Polynesia, the France moved the program to the Pacific in 66. 46 atmospheric tests, and then they went underground and reef and under lagoon and in the ocean. I find this is me, and I don't know this to be absolutely true because I am not a nuclear scientist. But what a place to conduct a nuclear test. You're going under coral reefs and setting them off? What in the world were you thinking? I mean, I say that to all of them, but especially these crazy French. That's nuts. Paris's own public posture in 2025, there was a parliamentary inquiry that scrutinized fallout and compensation of people in Polynesia. And they've been busy defending, the nuclear testing over there, have been defending its record. But even the French regulators are admitting uncertainty in old dose reconstructions. So, the cancer claims are not all closed, right? France's latest test was 1996, and it ratified the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty in 98. So, what about the United Kingdom? They did it in Australia, the Pacific, and Nevada. The UK did a total of 45 tests between 1952 and 1991. 21 atmospheric tests in Australia and the Pacific, and 24 underground tests conducted at the Nevada nuclear test site, usually in cooperation with the United States. Now they actually talk about it. Britain raced to the H-bomb with Operation Grapple in 1957-58 after earlier Australian shots. Veterans' accounts and lawsuits are still surfacing, right? In Nevada, after the 1963 limited test ban, Whitehall took its work underground in the U.S. Those 24 shots in Nevada closed out also in 1991, right? So what did China do during this time? China is kind of an outlier in one sense. All of its tests were at Lop Nur in Xinjiang, I think it's called. The commonly cited total is 45 tests total, 23 atmospheric and 22 underground. Some say it's actually 47, depending on how you treat the counting. So nobody knows for sure. China used towers, airdrops, high-altitude rocket shots early on. Then they moved to shafts and tunnels as the limited test ban treaty, took effect. The treaty status for China, as I told you before, they signed it but haven't ratified it, but they abide by the moratorium. Now let's move on to India and Pakistan in 1998. This is after everything. India did 2 tests at Pokhran, which is Rajasthan. 1974, the Smiling Buddha, they did a single underground device, publicly framed as a peaceful nuclear explosion. And then in 1998, Pokhran 2 and Operation Shakti, they did 5 underground devices from May 11th to May 13th, including a thermonuclear design, which is still debated to this day. Nobody knows whether they really did it or not. They did tactical fission units and a sub-kiloton experiment. Pakistan answered 2 weeks later with Chagai, May 28th of 1998. Pakistan announced 5 underground devices in the Roscoe range. Seismic data clearly shows at least one major event. Yields and the exact count are still argued. Then Chagai 2 on May 30th, 2 days later, they did another underground shot in the Pokhran Desert. So neither India nor Pakistan has signed the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. They both observe unilateral moratorium, but legally they're outside the fence. So they don't belong. Let's see. Israel, they don't talk. You never get anything. They are clearly blocked. It's widely assessed that Israel possesses nuclear weapons, and it has signed but not ratified the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. There are no declared Israeli nuclear tests. There is one allegation that in 1979 the Vela incident, where a U.S. satellite saw a double flash south of Africa consistent with an atmospheric test. Later reviews split between a likely test or other phenomenon. The National Security Archive has the declassified paper trail, and the U.S. never made a formal accusation. It's the same old thing for Israel. Nobody ever questions them, right? And nobody can. It's the Schrodinger test, simultaneously did and didn't, depending on which memo you wish to read. Then, the one that everybody condemns is North Korea. I don't understand why. Why don't they have the right to do anything? They're a country. Why doesn't anyone? I don't want them to, but who are we to tell another country they're not allowed? The only state to test nuclear devices in the 21st century is North Korea. They did 6 underground tests, 2006, 2009, 2013, 2 in 2016, and 1 in 2017. And Pyongyang claims the last was a thermonuclear device. So the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization International Monitoring System said the seismic signatures were recorded each time. And so the network does exist, and they can, keep track. So, plenty of tests. What I meant to do was try to find something that would take them all for the entire time period. How many atmospheric tests occurred, and how many underground and underwater? That would be interesting to know. So we already talked about the treaty posture and where we are going in that. Could testing resume, and what would it take? The U.S. law and the treaties today. The U.S. is under a self-imposed moratorium since 92. The limited test ban of 63 still bans atmospheric and underwater space shots, so anything legal would have to be underground and fully contained. The threshold test ban and PNET are limited at 150 kiloton, and it is in force. So the comprehensive test ban bans all tests, but isn't in force for the U.S. because it was signed but not ratified. So the president could lawfully order an underground test under U.S. law, but it would shred 3 decades of U.S. policy and every global norm that we've been following for the last 35 years, 34. Russia and China revoked as well the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty in 2023, whatever that they had ratified earlier, and both say they will mirror the U.S. moratorium. In 2024, Novaya Zemlya said they were ready at any minute. China signed but never ratified. I apologize. I got that wrong in the last sentence. They hadn't ratified. Russia revoked its ratification. But China also has a moratorium, and China hasn't done anywhere near as much as anybody else, of the majors anyway. So I don't know. How long would it take? That's an interesting question. There's a Government Accountability Office has noted that if the issue required an underground test, the length of time would be 18 months or more. Another GAO review said it would take up to 3 years to execute a test. Current reporting around Washington underscores the same point. Years, not months, unless corners are cut. An above-ground shot, which is illegal, or a rushed underground event would both have to be rushed. So anyone promising you next month, that's nonsense. If you're going to do it underground, it takes forever. A recent expert estimate for cost, what does it cost, puts a single underground test in the 9 figures range. 100 million, with some places citing 140 million. Once you add specialized drilling, instruments, containment, security, recovery, the exact figure depends on depth, yield, geology, and what sort of data you are looking at. A modern underground test is $100 million question mark. And what would you get out of it? Nobody knows. What's on the shopping list, right? People. Containment geologists, stemming designers, deep hole drillers, timing engineers, diagnostic engineers, radiation health, emergency response. The old graybeards who remember problems you don't want to rediscover have all retired. Maybe you got to bring them back. The GAO flagged workforce and aging infrastructure across the entire enterprise. With attrition and gaps, you need hiring, training, requalification. Not happening anytime soon. Holes in hardware, drilling rigs, they've all been taken away. Why would they leave them sit there that long? If they did, they'd all be unusable by now anyway. They need stemming material, miles of instrumentation cable, which has to be conducted. And then the U.S., how long are we going to do to put that into place, to create these new upgraded cables? Billions of dollars for that. Safety and offsite protection, modeling, pre-shot, air monitoring, rapid response plans, drill back plans, what they have to do to get that, paper and process, a presidential directive, internal safety boards, independent containment review, all kinds of stuff. So before you buy the bomb, you better buy the equipment, buy the hole, get the cork, get the wire, get the people, so you don't screw it all up before you even get started, right? The why in the world question is this: why do we care to do this again? Does it resolve the uncertainty in an aging stockpile that you can't get from a simulation? I don't know. GAO says there's other options short of testing. Refurbishment, selective retirement, waivers, something like that. Prove a new design, I suppose, would be another reason to conduct a test. Maybe want a new primary or unfamiliar physics package. I don't know. Maybe it's a deterrent to somebody else, a show of strength. Maybe we're trying to find out data that we can use in outer space and radiation, stuff like that. But then there's some why nots. Because you break the norm. CTBT is not enforced. The moratorium is there, though, and people aren't doing it. Everything that anybody does comes to Vienna, and the only country that has done anything in the last, this century, since the turn of the century, has been North Korea. Number one, there's a risk an arms race, and you don't need it. The U.S. has certified the stockpile for decades, and, time and money. Tons of money, 18 months minimum, in my view, to get you out there. And you still might not like the answer. Some tests vent, underperform, or reveal awkward truths. Nobody could really be sneaky about this to do it right now. We're going to find out immediately. Ramping up, going to take a while. What do you watch for? Deep drilling, watch for purchase, watch all the messaging that people are doing. And in late October 2025, the U.S. media have reported this presidential order to prepare for more. Is it possible? Technically, yep. My story tells you it's technically possibly ready. Operationally ready? Nope. Not tomorrow. 18 to 36 months would be the window. Strategically smart? I say no. You only do it if you can explain what answer you need that you can't get in other ways, right? You have all the data still available to you. And what about a geopolitical cascade? Russia's ready. China says it's ready, and everyone is really, we don't need this. It'd be foolish for any of them to do it. So basically, could we do it? Yes. Will it impress anyone? No. Will it impress The Rock? No. The Rock wants depth, not speeches. Will it impress our rivals? Probably not. More important audience is the network of sensors and allies that hear everything. In 2025, the cost of a bang isn't money in months. It's the sound of what? U.S. credibility hitting the floor once again. We need to stay away from this. My name is Samuel Trapp. I did get through the entire content of what I wanted to get here for part 2. I appreciate you listening. Ask you to join Sunday through Thursday every week. 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. at damradio.com/live or at internationalflavor.com. Good night.